Good afternoon, everyone. Samalit Hogan with the Massachusetts Small Business Development Center. I'm super excited to see you this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we have two great entrepreneurs themselves who are going to be sharing with us strategies on how to maintain your focus and emotional well-being. And those entrepreneurs are Jim Young and Beth Pellettieri. They're going to be sharing with you great insights and stories, and we might even do some exercises today, which will require your participation. So for those of you who have just joined us, remember, when you hover at the bottom of the screen there, you'll be able to press the participants button and raise your hand, or you can click on the Q&A button and ask a question. And if you raise your hand, I will unmute you. If you just type your question, I'll just read up your question out loud. So again, this workshop today, it's all about maintaining focus and emotional well-being. I do want to remind you all that we are doing this as a collaboration with other local technical assistance providers here in the Pioneer Valley, SCORE, Valley Community Development, Common Capital, the Franklin County CDC, and the Center for Women Enterprise. And I'm with the Massachusetts Small Business Development Center. I have put on the screen all of our contact information. So at any point in time that you have questions about anything regarding your business, feel free to reach out. We're here to help you. I also want to remind you that we have another webinar coming up later this week about the Paycheck Protection Program, better known as the PPP. So if you have any questions, if you've already got the loan, or if you haven't gotten the loan, or you're wondering what the heck is the PPP, tune in on Friday. You still have time to sign up. You can sign up on our website at msbdc.org, or our partners are also promoting this on Facebook, LinkedIn. You'll be able to find us. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Again, here's our email one more time. So without further ado, I'm going to let Jim Young and Beth Pellettieri take it over from now. And I will see you in just a few minutes. Go ahead,
Great,
Jim.
thank you. Thank you, Somali. Welcome. My name is Jim Young, as Somali said. My business is called The Centered Coach. I'm a coach, a facilitator, and a consultant. And the reason my business is called The Centered Coach is based on a vision that I started with when before I even created the business, before I became an entrepreneur, which is to help people find the calm, centered place from which they do their best work. And that's still a guiding principle for the work that I do. So when I was invited to present on emotional well-being and focus for entrepreneurs, I said, yeah, absolutely. That's right in the focus of the work that I do. So my goal today is to bring you some of my insights, some of the practices that I use, and I hope that they provide you some useful tips and perspectives for yourself. Being an entrepreneur is hard. I think any of you out there who are know that, and it's even harder right now. So first and foremost, I hope you're all safe and well, and thank you for giving some of your time today, and I hope that you walk away with some value. So as I mentioned, I'm a coach, but I'm also a professional improv comedian. Some of you out there who I recognize on the attendee list know that, and maybe you've seen me on a stage. And that informs some of the work that I do, and it actually informs the first thing that I want to do today. I'm not going to do any slides. I don't think Beth is either. We just want to have a conversation with you. And I also don't want you to just be sitting there watching us talk the whole time. So I'm going to try to have at least a couple of points in time where I ask for your interaction, and this is the first of them. So what I want you to do, this is an exercise that I use in multiple ways when I do presentations, especially, well, actually in the virtual setting, something I've adapted. It's called the random object game, and we're all going to play it right now. What I want you to do is, within arm's reach of whatever your workspace is, I want you to just grab something, and it doesn't matter what it is, it's a random object. What I'll do is I'll demonstrate the game, then I'll ask maybe one or two of you to play along and maybe volunteer what you come up with for this. So the way this works, I picked up this stone that one of my kids left on my kitchen table, which is where I'm working today. So I'm going to look at this stone, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to map this to some emotion that I've experienced in the last 24 hours. So this game is aimed at identifying emotional self-awareness, which is the root of emotional intelligence work. So if I look at this stone, it's kind of rough texture, and it's also got some crystal going on there. You can see some shiny bits in there. And I can map this back to an experience, actually two experiences that I'm having with two different organizations right now that are very similar, where they're going through some rough times, as many people are right now. So this rock has that roughness, but there's also glimmers of hope. So I'm mapping this to confusion, the confusion that comes about when you're in this rocky and rough times, but also maintaining hope. The bright and shiny parts of this remind me of the hope that I also have, that there are some great opportunities to build on here. So this is how I do random object emotional awareness. You can also do it for different uses. So I would love to just invite maybe one or two people, if you raise your hand, and if you'd be brave enough and willing to offer some what you might have discovered in the object that you have that connects to an emotion that you've experienced. And
Okay, Jennifer, go ahead.
Okay. Am I on video too, or just voice?
Just voice. We can only hear your beautiful voice.
Okay, all right. Here's my beautiful voice. Hi, everybody.
Tell us about your object too, Jen.
Okay, so I have this little highlighter man, and I have to describe him a little bit. So he's a man made out of highlighters, and his arms and legs are all different highlighters, and then he has a little brush head top, like hair, that comes up and down. And he is reminding me that, like, I'm trying to hold it all together right now. And so he's keeping all the pieces, like all the little highlighter pieces in his body. His arms and his legs are all holding in together. And then he has a smile on his face. And so that's reminding me to keep humor in everyday jobs. And then his hair is growing because like Jim Young, my hair is growing out of control and I don't know what to do with it.
Thanks, Jen. That's awesome. For those of you who don't know, Jen and I know each other through improv, and she's referencing a hair photo. I could do this right now, and you could see what she means. My hair will do all sorts of fun things if I allow it to, just like her highlighter. Is there anybody else who'd love to just take a minute and share from that exercise?
Yes, I just unmuted, and I apologize. I'm going to mispronounce it. Mary Kay or Mary G?
Marika, like Eureka.
Marika. Right. Okay, go ahead.
Hey, Marika, what do you got?
Hi. So I have a glass of iced tea that I recently poured, and it's probably about, 80% full. And so that sort of made a connection to me of just this feeling of like getting filled up and then getting depleted, like that sort of, that sort of, oftentimes like when I'm full, I feel like I can feel like, oh, now I'm going to go do this other thing and it's going to be depleted again, or, feeling like, oh, I got to fill back up again, or whatever the case is. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Marika. And bravo to both of you for being brave enough to step up and do an exercise like that on the spot. I've done this exercise multiple times in the last few weeks, and it's amazing. I've done it with some very technical people, left brain thinkers, and they come up with something. And so I hope you find lots of things today, but I hope that you might find that this is a practical exercise that you can use for yourself to just kind of get out of your head and into what's going on for you emotionally, to be able to connect from a different perspective. You can use this with a team as a check-in, maybe in a meeting, to just kind of take a temperature and look at the overall emotional well-being. So if you're an entrepreneur who runs an organization or leads a team, this is a tool that scales out really well and is very, very accessible. And it just shifts our perspective from the maybe hunkered down, doing things kind of in our head way that a lot of us go through the world, and myself included, a lot of times our default, into this more creative space where we can stop and reflect. And I'll touch base on that a little bit more because that's a key strategy that I want to talk about. So one of the points I also want to make is that emotions are neither good nor bad. Jen talked about her highlighter, and she noted that it has this ability to keep things together, which might be, oh my God, things are coming apart, that's bad. But she also talked about there's this happy quality to it. Those are all signals to us. Those are all information. And I actually want to read a quote to you from a book. Show you the book here. It's called Learning to Walk in the Dark by Barbara Brown Taylor. And this quote really struck me. I read it recently, and it's really connected to what we're talking about today. she's actually quoting another author in here, Miriam Greenspan, and she says, "There are no dark emotions," Greenspan says, "just unskillful ways of coping with emotions we cannot bear. The emotions themselves are conduits of pure energy that want something from us, to wake us up, to tell us something we need to know, to break the ice around our hearts, to move us to act." Emotions, I think, sometimes get a bad rap. We think that person's too emotional, or my emotions are giving me a problem. I'm feeling emotional. Those often have negative connotations. And what I want us to focus on, at least for today, is some of these notions. And a couple of things I loved about this. There are no dark emotions, just unskillful ways of coping with emotions we cannot bear. That tells me that we can build skills. If we have unskillful ways of coping with emotions, that's great news. That means it's something that we can learn. And in fact, I know we can. For 40 years or so of my life, I did not deal with emotions. For the last 10, I have learned how to deal with emotions. I know there are skills to build. And then also, that they're just energy, that they are ways to wake us up to something, to, as she says, break the ice around our hearts, to move us to act. Wow. Sometimes those signals are physical. We can use a proxy, right? My shiny stone here that I used as a way to get out of my head. Sometimes I can just sense them in my body. If I'm feeling frozen or hard or stuck, maybe my heart is frozen around something. It's a signal that I have an emotion coming up, an emotional reaction that means I'm not in a state of emotional well-being. I'm feeling some kind of emotional signal that's telling me what's going on needs attention. I need to move towards some different kind of action to process that. I just finished the first part of a course called Positive Intelligence, and I'm continuing on in a coaching program for that. And it talks about the person who leads this course, the man named Shirzad Chamine. He wrote a book by the same name, Positive Intelligence. And he often uses the analogy of a hot stove. We know intuitively physically, when we put our hand on a hot stove, we immediately take our hand off because it's painful, right? And our body is designed to say, that's painful, don't do that. Our emotions kind of work opposite almost of that. We oftentimes keep our hand on that stove. When that emotion comes up, we don't have that same responsive, reactive, get away from that. We can go into it. So instead of using that as just raw energy to tell us something needs to change, we might have something come up like confusion. In my example with the rock, I had some confusion around this situation. I could just stay in that. And sorry, I'm just going to grab a little water here. The reason that I do that, or that we all have different ways of doing that, is based on default strategies that we've built up over our lifetimes. In fact, starting really young. So let's say, for example, as a kid, you had a sibling that you looked up to, or a parent or some caregiver who yelled at you, right? And was an angry person or presented that way at times. And what that created for you was fear, which made you want to avoid that person or avoid situations where that person was going to yell at you. And maybe instead what you wanted to do was find ways to please them, to keep them from yelling at you, because that was really hard to deal with as a small person. Perfectly good coping strategy. The problem with that is that it starts to build these neural pathways, right? So in our limbic system, in our brain, it's building these connections that says, when you see these cues, an angry face, somebody who's upset about something, avoid them and try to please them. And this is one scenario. As we move forward, those are now default wiring for us. Those are our sort of the inverse of putting the hand on the stove. Our emotional response of putting the hand on the stove is to keep it there in this avoidance and pleasing pattern. In that coaching program I just referenced on positive intelligence, there's an assessment, and I'll put a link in the chat for it if you're interested in looking at it. I've taken it. It nailed me. It told me exactly who I am. It's called a Saboteur assessment, and it defines these types of ways that we respond emotionally to situations, the ways that we instinctively react, the habitual responses that create unhealthy emotional aftermath for us. So as an example, I'll bring this back to entrepreneurship. Let's say you run a business and you have a client who's come to you, and let's say your childhood was like the scenario I described. You have a response to angry people where you want to avoid them and please them. Those are two types of saboteurs that you'll see if you look at that assessment. That customer comes to you and they're upset because something didn't go well on a project. If you go from that default wiring, the likelihood is that you're going to avoid having some kind of difficult conversation with them and try to please them. That carries a ton of baggage. We're now worried about how to respond. We're taking our eyes off of the things that we could be doing. Those are ways that we're keeping our hand on the stove, to follow that analogy. I just want to give you some of the other default strategies in case you recognize them for yourself. There's avoidance, which I mentioned. There's overachieving, people pleasing, controlling, rationalizing, perfectionism, hypervigilance. So these are things that are very, very hardwired into our amygdala, our fight-flight response reactions when something difficult comes up, when we sense some sort of emotional risk coming for us. So when that happens, how do we take our hand off the stove? Well, we could carry this stone in our pocket all the time, and we could pick it up and we could look at it. What this is a proxy for moving ourselves out of our lizard brain and into our more logical, wise brain that knows how to use different strategies. And I want to talk about two things before I wrap up. One is, what are some ways to do that? And then what do we do once we get out of that reactionary mode? So the first is, what are ways that we can interrupt that momentum? How do we intercept when our saboteur voice comes in and says, avoid this situation, just make the person happy so it goes away and I don't have to deal with this, which I think we all know has long-term costs for our emotional well-being. So there are several small techniques that I practice regularly, and I do these as if I'm going to the gym to build up my physical fitness, but what I'm doing is building my mental fitness. I'm building the resilience to pause in these moments when things go difficult, whether it's in my business, with my kids, with another relationship, with a situation. So what I want you to do, I want to invite you to do an exercise with me. This is one of the examples, and I'm going to have you do a 10-second exercise. I want you to take your thumb and your middle finger and put them together lightly. And then for 10 seconds, I want you to rub your fingertips together with such a tension that you can feel the fingertip ridges on both fingers. When doing that, we have to focus so much. We have to stop everything that's going on to be that focused that I can actually feel the fingertip ridges. And what that does for me is it interrupts that moment where I am going to start down this default path, where I'm going to react instead of respond in an emotionally healthy way for me. So that's the first piece. And there are several ways to do that. You could take 3 deep breaths and feel the temperature of the air as it comes into and out of your nostrils. You could try and sense all of your toes. See how many toes you can feel. Maybe you wiggle them around, press them into the ground. These are things you can do in the middle of a meeting, in the middle of a conversation. When you start to get this sense, and maybe it's a clenching of the chest, maybe it's a furrowing of the brow, maybe it's a pit in your stomach, try these exercises. Use these as ways to stop that automatic response and see if you can shift into your prefrontal cortex, into your thinking brain that's doing better work. Once you're there, that's where the real shift can happen. And I will say, I practice these skills through a program where I did at least 15 minutes a day of exercises with these reps throughout the course of the day to build a consistent ability to identify the emotion that was coming up, to name it, and interrupt it so that I could then make a better choice. So this is progress, not perfection. I'm still working on it. I don't have a black belt yet, maybe a yellow belt. But I am noticing a significant difference, and I've had some specific moments, especially with my kids at home in the kitchen during the pandemic, the quarantine, where that set of skills has saved me from some bad choices on my part that have gotten to a healthier situation. And I'm just noticing a question: how long a day do I practice this? I practice it throughout the day. And we'll take some more Q&A at the end. I just happened to see that one come up and it's timely. I practice this several times a day. I use an app that actually prompts that so that I can build those muscles day by day by day by day. Once I am able to get to that place of something came up for me, I noticed that I didn't like it. I got a sensation. I got some kind of intuitive hit. And I did what's called a positive intelligence or PQ rep. I did some repetitions in my little gym here to interrupt this default response, which might be to please the other person, for example. If I can do that, then I can say, well, wait, if I make that choice, if I say yes to this client about this thing that I don't have a good feeling about, what will that mean for me? And I can then start to move to some other strategies. So the strategies that, there are 5 strategies that I look at. One is to empathize, and that might be to empathize with myself, with another, or with the situation. In the case of, we'll use that example again of an angry client upset about a project or something that went wrong. Empathize might come in there. I can empathize that they have a point of view. They may be frustrated. It doesn't mean that I have to fix it the way that I might have otherwise, but I can start to see what's going on there. Let me get in their shoes and then see how I would want to respond. It's a more thoughtful response for me. And I end up feeling better when I come from that place than the automatic, oh yeah, let me just fix that for you. Yes, sure, whatever you need. People-pleasing version. So empathize is the first one. And I'll put these in the chat afterwards, and we can certainly bring them up in Q&A. Explore is another one. That's about me getting curious. So let me understand, like, is there something that I missed? Why is this person upset with me? Is this about me? Is this about them? Is this about some other situation? So taking some time, instead of just responding, to just get curious and widen the lens so I can make a more reasoned choice and ultimately one that's better for my emotional well-being. I can also innovate. As an improviser, I'm trained to say yes and. Innovate is about saying yes and. Yes, that is a reasonable complaint for you. And I wonder if that means that I could go and improve my process. So I could take that as a gift, right? That this complaint is coming to me not as an attack, and maybe I still want to do something to make the client feel whole, but I can then also innovate that. And instead of being stuck in this place of all I did was make the customer happy, I treated that as a gift. They gave me some really useful material that I can use to improve myself or my business. Activate is another one, and that's just about, as the passage in the book said, move us to act. Maybe I've been avoiding this client for a while, and that's what caused this thing to come up. And maybe when I look at that, I say, you know what, it's time to get off my butt and do something about this here. I'm going to, instead of just impulsively respond, I'm going to take an action that I know is the right one. The last one is called Navigate, and that's about how do I take this situation, this small moment, and map that to the big arc of my career, my business, my life. So how do I tie that to a purpose that I have? I said at the top that the centered coach comes from my desire to help people find the calm, centered place from which they want to respond or do their work. So in Navigate, what I want to do is I want to connect what's going on now and how does that connect to my lifelong purpose? If I were to look back from when I'm 75 years old, my wise elder self, at this situation, what choice would I make in that moment? Would I do that differently? that can help me settle in and make a choice that's going to be better for my emotional well-being and ultimately probably for that whole situation. So I think I'm just about at time, and that's probably also a really good transition to, I know, what Beth wants, what Beth is probably going to talk to you about. I know I went through a lot kind of quickly there. We have plenty of time for Q&A, so if you have questions, please hang on to them and love to answer those at the end, but now I'll turn it over to Beth.
Thanks so much, Jim. And thank you all for being here. I just want to take a moment and appreciate that you're taking time out of the noise and out of the chaos of our current environment to check in with your emotional well-being. And just in doing that, you are taking care of yourself in this really powerful way. So my name is Beth Pellettieri, and I run BP Coaching for Beth Pellettieri, which helps people listen to their desires, sink into what they know, and live a more fulfilled life. And before becoming a coach, I worked in nonprofits for over 15 years. I did development campaigns. I was project manager. I ran communications, all the operation side. And at the same time, I was a support group facilitator and a doula. And so being a coach has allowed me to really blend the different parts of myself together, the implementer and the doer, and also this person that really likes to help people through life's big moments. And that's the exciting part about being an entrepreneur. We get to show up in the world as all of us, as who we are fully. And it's what I love so much about what I get to do. And so as we continue our talk today and our time together, I'd love to encourage you to do the same thing. How can you take care of yourself in a way that includes all of you? Being an entrepreneur allows us to be a whole person. You're taking your gifts into the world, what you love to do, and offering them as a service. And so taking care of yourself and owning that vulnerability is a huge part of your emotional well-being. So for our time together, I've actually created 4 little exercises to run through. And my hope is that long after this presentation is over, when you're feeling overwhelmed or confused or not sure what direction to take with something, you can use this piece of paper to anchor back into what works for you and find your way forward a little bit easier and a little bit faster than before. Now, I recognize that perhaps you are multitasking on some schoolwork or serving lunch or something like that at the same time. And so we are going to go through these exercises, and I recommend if you have pen and paper to do them in real time. But if not, I have a little handout. And so I will put in the chat when I'm done my email address, and you can email me, and I'm happy to send them to you afterwards. So that you can also have this sort of piece of paper or something on your desk to anchor in when you're feeling stuck. So with that, let's begin. And sorry, one more little note, which is just, I want you to think about what you already know about yourself as we move forward. We're illuminating who you are and what works for you and what you already know. So there's no hidden secrets here. It's just about writing down what comes first and trusting that voice. So I'd love everyone to remember that as an entrepreneur, you are inherently capable of finding new ways to thrive in chaos. You at your core are actually someone who does a pretty good job with risk and believing in yourself and believing in what you're capable of creating. Enough so that you started your own business and made yourself boss. And I know it might sound a little bit like rhetoric here, but I want you to let that sink in. Managing ups and downs is actually something that you're inherently good at. And you've been doing that already for a while. So the first exercise is called I'm Resilient, and it helps you remember your resilience. So I'd love you to take a moment and write down 3 times you thought your business was doomed, or that maybe you were feeling really stuck with your business, and you maybe thought about quitting, and you didn't. You kept going. You found a new way to handle the crisis that was happening, whether it's a conflict or a space or just feeling burnt out. So I'm going to be quiet for a moment and take a moment to write down 3 times you thought your business couldn't make it and you persevered. Awesome. So what I'm hoping this might bring up for you is a sense of power and pride, and maybe even a little bit of adrenaline if it was a difficult situation. And those feelings remind you what you're made of. The energy of making something work and the energy of a success after a failure. And the purpose of this exercise is really simple. It's just to remind ourselves that we are strong and capable and determined. And when we can remember those feelings and what we've created in the even out of the hard times in the past, we're more able to trust our current self to weather this particular storm. The person that handled the storms in the past can definitely handle this storm and the storms in the future. We recognize our own capacity for resilience. So the next exercise is around tapping into our gifts that help us navigate difficult times. When we're struggling, it's hard to remember why we're doing what we're doing to begin with. And I've definitely had those moments as we go. I've definitely had those moments where we get sort of stuck, or where I'm feeling really lost and perhaps I've lost my way. And I want you to remember why you started your business to begin with. You had something you loved doing, something you felt passionately about, something that you were excited to share in your own way or with your own unique take on it. And what part of your unique self did you want to share with the world? The truth of it is that even in this chaos, none of that has changed. The part of you that is having an offering or a service or a product that is deep within you and you can't get rid of it. It's just feeling a little bit extra tired these days, a little bit extra vulnerable. And part of taking care of your emotional well-being is tending to that voice and letting it feel heard. Now, there's a couple different ways I like to anchor back into myself when I've lost my voice and lost my way. And I'm going to offer these to you now. One is connecting back into your own voice. And the other one is sort of using other people to help you with that when you're feeling particularly lost. So this exercise is called I'm Brilliant, because you are. And it has two parts. Now I'm going to just make a note that if you've been struggling for a while, you might need to go back a little bit further. So maybe you felt lost a year ago and sort of you're still feeling on shaky ground. So the idea for this exercise is to tap into that best version of you, the version of you that felt clear and confident. So that could be a year ago or even two, or it could have been last week. So I'd love you to think about a blog post maybe you wrote, or an Instagram, social media post, a sale, an offering that you did. And when you put it out into the world, you felt clear and confident and you were like, damn, I'm brilliant. That was awesome. That was everything I wanted it to be. It doesn't have to be huge. It can be something small, but just one thing that you were like, that was a great post, or that was a great offering. So again, I'll pause for a moment, and you can just write down a mention of it. It doesn't need to be a very long thing, just a quick note so that it triggers your memory. Brilliant. Now, sometimes we can't tap into ourselves. It's just too hard and too far removed, and we're just too tired. And then we need someone else to do it for us. So I highly recommend a coach, of course, but we all have lots of people we can tap into to help us remember us at our greatest and with our greatest strengths. So you have customers who love what you do. You have friends that love what you do, perhaps a testimonial that speaks to you. Sorry, my Zoom is...
Just real quick, can we repeat one of the exercises real quick?
Sure.
Some of the people in the audience are asking for just a little bit more time. What I'm going to do, I'm going to share on the screen some flowing grass to give us a little bit more time.
Okay,
and
sure.
For maybe another minute or so. If you can repeat the exercise again for those
Sure.
of you.
Okay, of course. Go ahead. And again, if you are feeling flustered or this just isn't the right time, I have it on a handout and I'm happy to share that with anyone after. So the first exercise on remembering you at your best is to think about a blog post you wrote, or an Instagram post, or perhaps an offering you did, something that felt concrete and really good. And so just make a note of it. It doesn't have to be long. It can just be sort of a short thing to jog your memory when you're feeling confused.
Okay.
Great. So um, the next part is that sometimes we can't tap into ourselves. It's too hard for us to remember who we were in that moment. We feel too tired or too vulnerable or too stretched thin. And we need to have someone else do it for us. And we all have plenty of examples of people who have sort of echoed us back to us when we're at our best. It could be a client testimonial, a Yelp review, a response to a social media post, something that speaks to us, that reminds us of, again, us at our best. So I'd love for you to write down maybe one or two names of people or where you would know to go to look at those. As sort of a reminder to you when you can't sort of access your own inner voice to read those reminders from other people. You can go back to the wheat.
I actually found something even better. Let's see. Oh, we're doing a commercial now for student realization.
Great. And just in case you missed it we can go back to that. So these two exercises together are called I'm Brilliant. And the first exercise, in case folks didn't have enough time, and I apologize for that, is called I'm Resilient. So we can just swoop back up to that. So making note of a couple times where you thought you couldn't handle what the circumstance that was in front of you in terms of your business, and then did manage it, did persevere, did find a way around. And I recommend writing down one or two examples, or sorry, two or three examples that suit your resilience. So I will pause there. All right. So the next part of this is to remember that growth and change require this movement of expansion and contraction. 2 months ago, we had a really specific idea of what a business would look like or what it should look like, and what we thought it meant. It probably had a shop and a door. It probably was a place we visited or we met people at. Even if it was a side project as an entrepreneur, even if your entrepreneurship is a side project or mostly out of your home, we still had these really concrete thoughts about what a business looked like and felt like. And right in this moment, our vision of what that looks like is really changing. Our assumptions about what running a business means and how to go about doing that have fundamentally shifted. Perhaps a store built on the foundation of creating community is actually having to do a lot of that online, or a restaurant is delivering when they never imagined that would be part of their plan. Maybe for you, it's been a disaster. Probably it's been a mixture of good and bad, of creativity and also some struggles. Either way, we're in this period of invention and transformation. We're releasing these old ideas of what was possible, and we're opening to the creativity within us to create new opportunities, new ways of thinking about business, and new ways of offering our services in a way that fits the current world. And that requires this expansion and contraction. It requires planting seeds and then letting them grow, which is, of course, a perfect metaphor for spring. And what I'm finding personally in this uncertainty is that I'm very focused in the planting. We're all anxious for results. We want to make sure that the things we're planting are moving. We need some certainty. We want validation that we're on the right path. And of course, we want to earn an income because that's part of it. Someone once told me when I started my business that starting a business is like planting lots of seeds and you don't know which ones fell in your socks. And that's where we are right now. We're planting a lot of seeds and we're waiting to see what happens. But the ideal way of planting seeds is actually to brainstorm what you're planning, to think about your garden and how you want to set it up or grow, and then to plant, and then to rest and to tend to the garden. We have to plant some seeds and then sort of wait and see what worked, what didn't work, what didn't have enough sun, and then maybe tidy it up, prune, reassess. And so just like a garden, we have to do all the parts. We need to innovate, create, plan, then do the actual work. And then we have to rest. We have to put it all down and see how it feels. What part of our new business and this transformation felt good? What's stressing us out? What feels icky? We have to put it all out there and then release it. And each of these pieces, the brainstorming and innovating, the planting, and then the resting, require different things from us. They require different parts of how we move through difficulty and how we move through change and transformation. The part of us that needs innovation and creativity requires openness and transformation and spaciousness. The part of us that needs to plant and do the actual hard work requires focus and determination and time, knowing that when we're planning something new, we're not actually going to have time for some of the other things on our to-do list. And the part of us that knows it's time to stop planting and rest needs pause and patience and an ability to let go. And then we get to start the cycle all over again. So our third and fourth exercises are actually connected, and they're called Remembering What I Need. So when we're tending to our garden, in this metaphor, it can be particularly hard to remember what we need as we go through the different parts. Remembering what I need when I'm brainstorming, then remembering what I need when I'm planting, and then when this releasing and letting go. And in particular, I find the releasing and letting go to be the hardest. I think as business owners, it's really easy to fall in the habit of planting and planting and planting without lifting our heads up. It's easier to tackle the to-do list and to keep moving. And we have a much harder time being in the creativity and innovation space and also being in this letting go space. So for this exercise, I'm going to actually focus on this creativity space and the releasing spaces. Okay, so with that, now that I've laid this out, I actually want you to ignore everything I said so that you can sort of sink back into yourself and your own inner voice. So release the metaphor, release all the worries, and thinking about that. We're going to start with part one, which is, what do you need for yourself when you create and innovate? What do you need when you're when you're thinking about planning your garden and you're brainstorming those new ideas? For me personally, it's usually time alone, space from social media, space from the noise of what other people are doing, and especially what they're telling me I should do. Usually I'd like some fresh markers and a clean piece of paper and some music maybe in the background, or a walk or a meditation. So I want you to anchor in for you, of course, what are the things you need to create and innovate? And write down 2 or 3 things that help you get into that energy and that spaciousness. All right. So the next part of this is actually what I think is the trickier one, which is when you've been planting for a while and you're getting that inner voice in your head that's like, all right, put it down, and you're having trouble at releasing and letting go and walking away. Because it's really hard to pause when we're feeling uncertain or nervous, or when those anxiety responses that Jim talked about are sort of filtering through us. It's hard to let go when we're trying to make something work. But that's, of course, exactly when we usually need to let it go. So, for me personally, one of the things that helps is texting a friend or my coach, or giving attention to another task that's not related to my business. Perhaps returning to a more mundane, everyday part of the business, or going for a walk, or spending some time with outside. So, again, I'm going to have you take a moment and write down the 2 or 3 things that help you pause when you need to release and stop planting. Okay. So together now we have 4 exercises. You have the I'm resilient, the I'm brilliant, and then the 2 lists, part 1 and part 2, for what you need in these different times. And what I recommend is if keeping it sort of on a place on your desk or somewhere there. So when you feel lost or feel overworked, you can a little bit more easily find your way back to center and find your way back to some of the tools that work for you, or some of the feelings that help you stay in your power when things are feeling tricky. Um, so I'm going to take a moment now to just close on this Brene Brown quote. If you don't know her, she's a master vulnerability researcher, and she's consulted with lots of large businesses and done many impressive things talking about leadership and bravery. Here's her quote. You either stand inside your story and own it, or you walk outside your story and hustle for your worthiness. What we're trying to do right now as a collective is transform our businesses into a new way of being. And we can transform in a way that's authentic to us and authentic to our business's growth. But that requires staying in alignment with our purpose and tapping into our needs and our continuing to take care of our own well-being as an entrepreneur. When you're focused on building from a place of creativity and innovation and transformation that feels good to you, you're owning this new path. You're owning what feels good to your business, and you're owning what it means to run your business in uncertain times. And that is just a hugely powerful statement, to stand in your power and love what you create, no matter the way the wind is blowing. So thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate all your reflections. I look forward to hearing them as we talk more, and I hope this is helpful as we move through our days. So Somali, I'll hand it back to you for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was beautiful. I don't know about you guys. I am so sorry you couldn't hear the beautiful music that was coming through this in the background. I'll figure it out for next time. But thank you for guiding us through those short exercises and meditations. It's so important. We do have a question here from one of our attendees today, and this could go to either one of you, Beth or Jim. How do you find a way to how do you get yourself in that mode? What is a good way to kind of find your way to release that tension and be able to actually get into some of these exercises and practice them?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a shot at that first. So yeah, that's from Yahara. Thanks for all the feedback coming through in the chat. Really appreciate hearing how that's helpful to you. So for me, I've gotten very much into mindfulness over the years, and especially the last couple of years. And so I do meditation on a daily basis. I use the Insight Timer app on you can get that on any kind of smartphone, because what I found was that I needed some guidance. I needed guided meditation. And what it does is it gives me a daily practice to slow things down and to just sit and be with what's going on for me, so that I have access to that, because it's taken me a long time to develop those muscles. And what I found is, as I made the reference before, it's a lot like physical fitness. My mental fitness requires regular practice. And so I started with daily meditation, with maybe 10 minutes of a guided meditation, listening to somebody. And I've since layered onto that these micro practices that I do throughout the day. And again, I use the technology to kind of help remind me. It prompts me. It gives me a way to track it. It gives me a lot of tools for that. So for releasing, that's one of the skills, one of the tools that I've found most helpful is to have some quiet time so I can access my, what's coming up for me emotionally and see what needs to be let go of. Or, as I heard in a podcast recently, it's a lot less about letting go for me than it is about letting be. Just allowing what is there to be. I don't have to actually release it. I can just accept it.
That's a great point, because many of us think that we have to do this sort of magical, sort of very intentional thing to be able to relax and be at peace, but it's not really about that, right? It's more about just accepting what it is and breathing into it, and things will finally clear out for you. You'll find clarity after you practice these exercises every day. And for me, I do it every morning, right? Not everybody's able to do this, but I try to every morning take 10 minutes of breathing exercises, whether in the shower or I'll go into another room and close myself up from my 6-year-old and my husband. And then while they're sleeping, I'll do some breathing exercises. So that's great. I want to remind everyone here that you can raise your hand by clicking on the participants button that shows up at the bottom of your screen underneath your video. And you can raise your hand and I will unmute you if you want to ask your question verbally as opposed to typing it in the chat. But either way is okay. Now, Beth, how about you? What other suggestions you might have for folks that are listening in today?
Yeah, I liked how Jim said it, that it doesn't have to be releasing and just sort of letting it be. For me, sometimes meditation feels like another activity, like another thing to do. And so I think that sometimes we just need to create some quiet. And I don't think that has to be huge moments of quiet. Like I have 3 small kids at home, so sometimes that just means when they're all off playing for that, for that moment where they all got distracted on different things, putting down my phone and just closing my eyes in my kitchen until someone yells mom again. So I think we don't have to, it can be these things like meditation and breathing exercises. And obviously those are awesome tools in our tool belt. But I think we can also just find those little pauses where we're shutting down our brain. We're using our Jim's finger exercises. I think there's a reason why we get great ideas in the shower. It's because it's the one time we're not distracting ourselves or coming up with another activity or moving from thing to thing. So maybe just also take a longer shower.
Yes, and Jim, I particularly like how you presented the exercises too as interrupters of thoughts, right? And it's interrupter of thoughts, and most often we will want them when we're having negative thoughts. So right now, there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen. And when you find yourself thinking negative thoughts, that's when to use some of those exercises to kind of interrupt it so that then you can allow for positive energy flow and so on, so that you can think of creative ways of creative solutions to whichever situation you're in. Is there any other suggestions or advice you might give to folks who are finding themselves very often in that state when counting your toes or rubbing your fingers is not enough?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some of the micro things, but I know that especially in the last several weeks, I've found that I just need to get outside for a long walk. I need to be out in something more spacious. And as Beth said, I forget what the science was around this. I heard this on a radio on NPR I think a couple of years ago, that we get those ideas when we're driving in our car or in our shower because something's changing in our brain chemistry. We're in a more open space. So whether that's for me doing a project out in the yard or going out for a long walk, I definitely need those bigger spaces sometimes, especially when I'm sitting with something that feels really hard. The other thing that I do a lot is I just lean on my network and my resources. I loved the exercises that Beth had us do, and when I wrote about what I do to release and do creative work, is I co-create. I first need quiet space for myself and quiet time to be expansive and reflective, but then I need to go talk to people. I need to not be alone with my thoughts around what's coming up, and so just continuing to invest in the relationships that I have, whether that's with colleagues, peers, my coach, other folks, that definitely helps keep me centered too.
Great, thank you so much. And I have 2 of my colleagues here on the webinar today, Anita Eliason and Dee Dice, and I want to invite them to either ask a question or make a comment, if you would, Anita and Dee.
Hi, this is Dee Dice, and hi Jim, hi Beth. I'm glad you're here. Great presentation. Beth, I wanted to know if you could give me a couple of examples of the last exercise that you presented, because I found that personally a little bit hard.
Sure. Could you tell me a little bit more about where you got stuck?
So I thought, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought it was ways that you remind yourself how to stop and to let go or let being. So, oftentimes with me, that comes to when my neck hurts, that I've been crouching over my computer too long. But I'm not sure that's what you intended that to be.
Yeah, that's a great question, Dee. So thank you for sharing. And so for me, normally I start getting this voice in the back of my head that's like, put it down, put it down. It's like walk away from the newsletter or walk away from worrying about how this is gonna, it's time to take a break. And so I know sometimes it's hard to hear that voice, right? Because we're on a sort of a frantic, we're moving things. I know there's a lot going on right now in our businesses. And so one of the small ways that you could do that is, so I actually have on my desk a little reminder. It's probably back. It says, there's nothing to do. So that's one of my reminders to remind myself that to be in that state of receiving, of openness, and sort of reminding myself to pause. I've set reminders on my phone sometimes when I'm particularly working really hard to take a break. It says, it comes up as saying there's nothing left to do. So again, these ideas of taking a pause, of giving yourself that moment in the shower where you're not doing anything, and so that you can release what you're working on. So that wasn't, I think in my, in when I was talking about the exercise, I was thinking of activities sort of that get you out of the working mindset, like taking a walk or meditating. But I don't think it has to be that big. It can be something really small where you have a reminder on your phone or a 5-minute calendar thing on your Outlook that pops up, and you close your computer and you shut your eyes for 5 minutes if you can, or even a minute, and just sort of allow your body to rest. Because one of the beautiful parts of this, that when you stop planting and you sort of allow for that pause, usually you have much better ideas than you did when you were so busy getting everything done. Usually there's these like huge moments of clarity that can come through you because you're not so busy on that to-do list. And so the more I've been working on my business, the more I've been really trying to sink in those moments, because I make such better decisions when I'm paused. And I have much greater inspiration, quite frankly, on creative ways to do the same thing that I was going to, a different angle or a different perspective. Does that help?
Yeah, that really helps a lot. And I also wanted to reference everybody to an organization called Strategic Coach that I have listened to for a while, and they are like a national organization that many of us can't even afford at all. But I have to say they're fascinating. And the first book I read of theirs was about a way of structuring your week. And certainly all of us don't have this liberty, but I want to explain it to you just so that you can think about it. And that is how they taught entrepreneurs to structure was that you have work days, maintenance days, and free days. And so there are certain days that you worked on your projects, you structure that it was a work day, and then there were maintenance days for whatever bills or whatever laundry, whatever your maintenance of your life with. And then there are free days, and the free days you absolutely did nothing work or maintenance related. And what they found was that most entrepreneurs on those free days had more creative ideas that boost their business. And that was one of the keys to having a very successful business, is that and there was also a direct correlation between the number of free days and the progress and success of the business. So I just found that fascinating. And for many years in my life, I had a seasonal business. So I would take that to another realm, because I would, work for 6 months straight, and then I'd have 6 months off. And, but anyway, it's just another strategy that coincides with both what you and Jim have been saying. And so, yeah, thank you.
That's brilliant. I love that idea, Dee. That's really, really great. Very cool.
Great. Thank you, Dee. Thank you for sharing that. That's excellent. And could you repeat the name of that book one more time?
The company's name is Strategic Coach. And the book I read is it's one of their first books. It's very slim and it's quite outdated. And it talked about, 7 different principles about what will be happening in the next century, which is already here. One of them being, invest in female entrepreneurs, use, this different strategy of structuring your week. So there were several different principles. I have to say, I forget the name of that. I might be able to look that up while I'm on mute.
Yeah, no problem. Yes, we'd love if you could share it for sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. Anita, I think I have you on. I think you have the ability to unmute yourself. Go ahead if you'd like to share a comment or a question.
Thank you. I'm Anita Eliason. I work as a business advisor at the MSBDC, and I'm working with a lot of people who started a business because they loved it. Maybe it was 15 years ago, maybe it was 20 years ago. And in the course of taking this break, this unexpected break, they're really reevaluating whether or not they're still in love with it because, especially people that have restaurants, they want to serve people, they want to be in hospitality and they've loved it, but it's very labor intensive on the business end as well. And it's almost as though this is giving people a real pause. And I wonder if either, Beth or Jim, you can give us some prompting questions to ask people as they think about, has this run its course? Am I really ready to let this go? Because sometimes it's also time to let things go and maybe do something different or do something or just move on, and what could be some good prompting questions to stimulate that thought process in an organized way. We don't want anyone doing anything emotional like, oh, I'm leaving, but maybe, when there is a break, it is time to really regroup.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the practices that I use around any sort of key decision making, and something especially as momentous as, am I going to continue my business or am I going to change my career, is I work with my values. And I've developed those values over time and gotten them very specific. So I have a list of about 8 values that are my personal core values, and they're phrases that mean something to me. So being a great dad is my number 1 value. Creating as much fun as possible is my second value. Being of service to others is my third value, right? So I know who I am through those values, and I use those on a regular basis. So I do a monthly check-in on my values, and I think about, am I doing all of those things? Am I parenting the way that I want to parent? Am I, in the work that I'm doing, being of service in the ways that I want to in the world? And also when a major decision point is coming to me, should I pivot in this direction with my business? Does that serve my values? Because when I'm not operating off of those, and I've done that for a long time in the work that I did in my previous career, is I was not honoring my values. And there was so much stretching and dissonance and tension in that was causing me a lot of harm. And so I do that on a regular basis, but especially when it comes time to look at, is there a big decision? Can I honor my values, or would I be giving away part of myself because I think I should do this thing? And if the word should is coming up for me anywhere, it's a really big red flag warning sign that something's out of alignment for me, and I need to stop and pause and take some more time and probably get out of my head and talk to somebody else, because I might be lacking a perspective.
Yeah, this is Beth, and I'll just echo that. There's a really beautiful framework for coaching that I imagine Jim also knows, where we talk about our circumstances and then our beliefs about our circumstances. And then we have feelings about those beliefs, and then we take action based on our feelings. And so one of the things that's really happened for everyone is that our circumstances have dramatically changed. And with that, there's this sort of shaking of beliefs that before maybe we thought were shoulds or have tos. I have to run my restaurant, or I have to run my business a certain way. And so because our circumstances are changing, it allows us to review and reevaluate our beliefs and whether or not they're still true for us. There's great beliefs like I love my children is a belief that serves me very well. And then there's other beliefs that are causing us suffering, like I need to own a business, or I need to, keep my restaurant in my family, or whatever. And so I would really recommend that folks take a look at their beliefs, especially the beliefs that they might be holding that are causing them pain. And Jim, as Jim said, a really great, easy way to find your beliefs is the things that you say should to. So I should, I should do XYZ on Mother's Day is a belief that I'm holding about Mother's Day. So when we start writing down our beliefs, journaling our beliefs, saying our beliefs out loud to a coach or to a friend, it allows us to start wiggling them and seeing if they're still true. Byron Katie does the work And her work is all about wiggling beliefs. And she has a bajillion resources on how to do that. But I'd really recommend for anyone, if you're trying to pivot or trying to think about your business in a new way and you get stuck on these shoulds or these things that you think you need to do, it's a really great time to check in with your beliefs and then get back to the circumstances, because the circumstances are your facts and they're not changing. And that's sort of where your truth can come from. I hope that helps.
I love that, Beth, because personally, I think of myself a very creative person. And as an entrepreneur myself, I'm always thinking I have all these great ideas, and they're fabulous, and they all come to me all at once. And that's on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, there's something about my business that I've been wanting to do for a long time that I think I should do, but it's hard to prioritize sometimes what's important, and some things sometimes they conflict with one another. So just to kind of have that check in with your beliefs, that's excellent advice. I appreciate that. So I'm going to invite Jahara. She has raised her hand. Jahara, go ahead and ask your question or make a comment.
Hi, thanks. This has just been wonderful. Appreciate all of your shares, and you're walking this path. Yeah, Jim, you were sharing at the beginning about like 6 or 7 or 8 behaviors like perfectionism and vigilance, hypervigilance, and these other things that, and how they're reactions to stuck places inside. And I was wondering if you, some of them really surprised me that you kind of were holding in that way, and that was fascinating. And I was wondering if you'd be, I think it would help me loosen my attachment to going in those pathways, those directions. If you could be so kind as to just go a little deeper and into each of them and just explain how are they reactions and actually not our nature. And so we can find some more room to bring out our nature and more leeway to leverage to get off of them.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I put a link in the chat. I'll add it again so it's a little bit closer to the bottom. And actually, Sonali, would you maybe put it in? It's just positiveintelligence.com, just so people.
Sure, no problem. I'll take care of that. I'll add it.
If you go to that site, there's an assessment you can take, which will actually rate you against these 9 archetypes that this school of thought talks about. And to your point, is it our nature, or is it this sort of malformed part of us, right? So my results when I took that assessment had stickler, as they call it, as my top saboteur. And they use the word saboteur because it's the way that I can self-sabotage myself. So a stickler is a perfectionist, and I've known this about myself for a while, and it's something I continue to work on, because there are, as you point out, there are positive qualities about that approach. I have a really high standard for quality, and I want to provide great results. And that serves me really well when I'm working with my clients. It serves me really well in maintaining my house and all sorts of other things. The problem gets to be when I push it too far. When I start to believe that that's what runs my life, or that's what is running my life, because I believe I have to always be more and more perfect, it's a self-defeating prophecy, and it creates a lot of stress for me. And I think that's a good dividing line, is when you can start to see signs of stress for yourself. So whether that's around perfectionism, or I don't have this as a strong trait, but hypervigilance. I'm always on the lookout for things that could be harmful to me. Is that creating a lot of fear in your life, guilt or shame or stress? If you're living in those spaces and you can identify that it's coming from that type of that character quality, then that's where there's some room to work, I think, to say, okay, am I leaning on this too much? And am I just by default going to this place out of a fear-based reaction, versus I'm making a choice that I want this thing to be perfect because it really matters. And maybe 20% of the time, perfectionism helps me. The rest of the time, it's just causing me to spin my wheels and get frustrated. And honestly, the worst thing that happens is that I judge myself, and I'm overly harsh on myself, or maybe it's actually worse, I'm overly harsh on other people. So I'll give you an example where this this came up for me recently, and where this little exercise or variation of it helped me. This was about a month ago. I was in my kitchen. It was dinner time, and my teenagers were in the other room on their screens, and I wanted them to come in and set the table. And I let them know, and they didn't just march right in, which would have been the perfect response. They should have dropped everything right on the spot and been right after it. And I started to get frustrated, as I have in the past. And I paused and I did this mindfulness exercise for 10 seconds, and I was like, wait a minute. Does it matter if they come in 2 minutes versus 2 seconds? Absolutely not. I still want to, as a parent, be enforcing the discipline for them to contribute to the household, but I don't need them to do it exactly the way that I think it should be done. That's where it gets to be damaging for me. And if I can identify that I am starting to feel negative and more stressed than I need to, that's where, I need to, for me, I want to pause and stop and say, how can I do this differently? This doesn't feel good for me. I'm keeping my hand on the stove, to borrow that analogy again. Does that help, Jahara?
Yeah, let me go ahead and unmute her again because I had already taken her off, but I will allow her to talk. Go ahead, Jahara.
Yeah, that was wonderful. I appreciate your humanity, and I appreciate your moving into that zone. It's a big deal to let go of some of those entrenched reactions and to actually look at them from a whole different perspective, and even to assess, am I stressing myself? Yeah, they can just run a person. So that's a real takeaway from today's presentation. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Great.
Thank you.
Excellent. So let's see, if anyone else has a question or a comment, feel free to raise your hand. I can go ahead and unmute you. Some of you have already typed your questions. Thank you for doing that. That's very much appreciated. Let's see here. I did put on the chat, as you asked, Jim, I did put in the Saboteur assessment. Positiveintelligence.com is the website. Also, let's see here, from Beth did put on the chat as well. This is a great way to play with wigging. Well, sorry. What was that? Wigging beliefs? Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, I said wiggle it. I just mistyped it, so then I wrote it wiggling. But it's, yes, a great way to play with wiggling beliefs is thework.com, and Byron Katie's focus. That's what she does.
Oh, okay, that's great. And then there's also D Dice did contribute to this by adding the website to the book that she was talking about, www.thestrategiccoach.com. That's also in the chat. If you press in those 3 dots at the lower right of your screen, after we're done today, you can actually download the chat so that you can copy that into a text document that will live in your computer, and you'll have those links with you today. And yes, today's webinar will be available as a recording on our website, downloadable from our website. That's msbdc.org. I think I put in the link somewhere earlier in the chat. I'll copy and paste it again just so you have it. And for those of you who registered through the MSBDC website, whether you were sent here by one of our partners or just happened to find us on the internet, you will get the links to that video once it becomes available on our website. So let's see, any other questions or comments from the audience? And let's see, seeing none, I want to invite both Jim and Beth to give us your, a few last words for today's webinar.
Beth, why don't you go ahead first?
Sure. So I just thank you all again for taking time to focus on your well-being and your emotional state and how to focus during this turbulent time. I think that just by showing up, these are sort of the intention setting activities that help you ground in yourself and listen to yourself a little bit clearer. So I want to just, again, I guess I'll just remind everyone that your wisdom is already within you. So there's nothing you need to do. It's great that we have all these resources. It's always helpful as a pushing off point, but all of this wisdom is already within you. And so I think the greatest gift when we're feeling frantic and when we're feeling overwhelmed is to pause, to take a walk, to assume that we can get to those emails later and to slow it all down. All right, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. I'll hand it off to Jim.
Thanks, Beth, and thank you so much, Samali, for all the support today and coordinating this. And thank you all for taking the time to spend with us today. I hope you found some useful tools and perspectives. My personal life purpose is to slow down and connect. And I appreciate that you took some time out of your schedule today to slow things down, to connect with some ways that can provide you some more peace. I know this is a really trying and challenging time for all of us, and especially entrepreneurs have a lot going on all the time. This is an even more intense time. So thank you for taking care of yourselves. I think that helps our world. And I really appreciate spending the time with you today. If you want to learn anything more about the work that I do, you can find me online at thecenteredcoach.com. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim and Beth. And I want to remind everyone that I work for the Small Business Development Center, and I'm one of many other great advisors throughout the region. Here you can see in the screen contact information for other organizations who are collaborating to bring these educational workshops to you. I want to remind you too that next week, next week we have a lot of other webinars coming up, but this Friday, for those of you who have access to PPP, that's coming up. Next week we'll have other webinars with round this table discussions of marketing. So next week is going to be all about reopening businesses and marketing, branding discussions, as well as hearing from other business owners like yourself. So we invite you to join us here again. I'm putting on the screen again all of our contact information, and I want to remind you that one of the ways that we help people as advisors too is not telling you what to do. No, that's not what business coaching is about. It's about listening to you, helping you get out of that box, helping you figure out ways in that you can help yourself. There's some strategies, like Beth said, the wisdom is within you. So one of the ways we can help you is by listening, by helping you see things, maybe change perspective, asking you questions. So and then helping you discover yourself. What are the strategies that you could do to help you yourself get out of whichever situation you're in? So thank you again, Beth and Jim, for spending a whole hour and a half with us this afternoon. I want to give a quick shout out to the Small Business Administration, the State of Massachusetts Housing Economic Development Office, and UMass Amherst for hosting the MSBDC program and making it possible for me to do this work for all of you. So thanks again. Have a wonderful afternoon. Enjoy the sunshine. Take care.